can really celebrate someone's life in a positive way, Kate.
It certainly is. And this is actually a very sort of a interesting topic to me, and I hope my father is listening because just recently my father had a little bit of a medical scare and he collapsed and he ended up in hospital, and he's all right and he's fine. But while he was, I'm the eldest of three girls and a beautiful devoted mother who's devoted to us and to him. But at the time it was quite confronting for me because my sisters and my mother let me go into battle with the medical staff or ask the questions or change him from hospital or whatever it was. And so now that he's all well and happy and out of hospital, I sort of had a little phone call to him a couple of weeks ago and said, I really would love to discuss, you're getting on, but I love you and I would like to make sure that the decisions that I make, if you have a funeral or when that time comes.
Yeah, it's not an if.
It is going to happen. It's going to be when. Let's hope not too soon.
Yeah.
And we had numerous conversations, and each of the times that I tried and attempted to have this discussion, he avoided it and didn't want to talk about it. And I happened to bump into Elizabeth, and Elizabeth told me that she is doing a seminar, and Kathryn, on how to have a fabulous funeral. And I thought it'd be a very, very good time to get them in and have a chat.
Absolutely, because it's like taxes, it's inevitable, right? It's going to happen to all of us eventually.
It is, and it is confronting to talk about.
Of course,
and I'm even feeling uncomfortable talking about it and getting all hot here in the studio. But
you're getting all fidgety.
I am, and my hands is getting hot and clammy, and it is. I mean, no one wants it to happen, but it is something that we should talk about. And as someone who is going to have to make the decisions, I need to know how I'm going to get that information out of them.
And I think maybe the other thing is the way that we handle death in Western cultures could be part of the problem, because it's all this fearful, and you talk to people and they say, I've got to go to a funeral. Oh, gee, I hate funerals. You're never going to meet anyone who says, oh, gee, I love funerals. It doesn't happen, right? We all feel uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be like that. It should be, let's go and celebrate this person's life, and let's go and, I almost feel sad sometimes that when you go to a funeral and the service goes for an hour and you think, wow, all that life, and we've squished it into an hour. And it just, a couple of people might get up and talk about, different periods in their life, but it never seems enough to me.
Yeah, I went to one the other day and it was 2.5 hours and it was amazing. And it wasn't a conventional ceremony, but it was fulfilled, and her life was fulfilled, and it was sad because it was cancer and she was a mother and all those things. But it is funerals. Let's get into them and see what Let's
pull them apart.
Pull them apart, exactly.
And also joining us tonight, Nicole McGuinness is the managing director of eHarmony, one of Australia's biggest dating sites. And tonight we're speaking about breakups, because spring is one of the biggest times for breakups, according to some research.
Spring, you'd think that was the time that it was all happening and romance and love.
I think, it's a big wedding season, isn't it? In spring,
it's the start of it.
Apparently, because new beginnings and those sorts of things, it's when people start to this
question
time.
It.
Yep, and around January after Christmas, people think new beginning. I'm going to end the relationship. So we'll talk about why with Nicole shortly. Incidentally, our love song tonight is by Phil Collins, who broke up with his wife by fax machine years ago. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah, that's not the way to do it.
No, it's certainly not the way to do it.
Spring also means it's a great time to head to Canberra if you don't live there, like our listeners on 2CC are lucky enough to do. So, Kate, we'll chat about Floriade.
Yes, it's the start next weekend in Canberra of Floriade, which is all about the bulbs and the annuals, art, music, food, culture, technology, biology and the Australian celebration, all at Commonwealth Park.
Oh, wonderful. When it comes to organising an event, it takes a lot of organisation and planning. Kate, as you know, I've seen how busy and committed you are to your work. Our guest tonight, Melissa Dunbar, is the same. She's got a company called Big Fish, and she's organised some major events, including a dinner for the Queen. So she's going to tell us what to think about, what you've got to consider in those sorts of things as well. We've also got the top 10 tips for being the perfect wedding guest. So if you've got an invitation to a wedding sitting on your fridge at the moment, you may want to listen to this later this hour. We'll get to that. Plenty to get through, so let's get started.
So we've given them a really big wrap in the intro. We've got Elizabeth Trevan and Kathryn Breusch, and they're hosting an information night on how to have a fabulous funeral, and they're joining us in the studio. Hello, girls.
Hello.
Hello.
So tell us, first of all, Elizabeth, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background, because you're not only funeral celebrants. I've had the experience of using you for weddings, and I know you do baby naming ceremonies.
I do all sorts of fun things. Commitment ceremonies, weddings, yes, funerals.
Vow
as well.
renewals?
Vow renewals, of course.
Yeah.
All the fun stuff. And anything in between, house cleansings.
House cleansings.
That's
Really?
a whole other topic.
Well, you'll just have to come back.
I know.
Does it involve a mop and bucket, or is it a psychological thing?
Oh, if it's me, it's definitely not a mop and bucket.
So tell us about what you do, how long you've been doing it for.
Yes, so I've been a celebrant, as has Kathryn, for the last 13 years, and it's been a real journey of discovery. And this last 13 years has taken us to this point now where we've actually learnt so much about not only weddings, but funerals and memorials and all of that stuff. And that's where our passion has arisen. And we've realised that community needs to know more about their funerals, and that way they'll be more fabulous. So that's why we're having this community discussion on Wednesday in North Sydney about having a fabulous funeral.
So what are the key points to having a fabulous funeral?
Well, I think it comes down to some key things. I think it's about having the discussion, which is what you were talking about before. It's actually having a discussion with family or friends about what you feel is really important to have at your funeral. And it can be something as simple as the location, to say, do you know what, I've got a great relationship with my surf club or my golf club, and I think that that is where I want my life to be celebrated. Let's start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm sitting here thinking.
Kate's wondering what her father's attached to.
Quick, write it down, Kate.
I'm thinking, would it be this area or this area? So there you go. That's why there was that pause.
I'm sorry, but that's a starting point. I mean, it is location. The next thing that I start to talk to people about is maybe music, because music and storytelling at funerals, to me, and I know to Kathryn as well, I think that is the heart of it. And that's why, as you were talking about, Kaylee, sometimes that 40 minutes in a crematorium chapel is not enough. If you want to encompass a whole person's life, for it to be authentic and for every facet to be depicted, it's got to have its own time.
And it needs planning, I think, and it needs to. I noticed my mum, the same thing as Kate. You don't want to have that conversation because you don't want them to realise their mortality, I guess. But my mum will often say stuff about, on my funeral this, or, I must have, religious music and this hymn or that hymn. And she's actually gone through all of her photographs and picked the photos that she wants to have.
Fantastic.
I want this one at the front, I want that one at the back, and she's got them all ready to go. And a lot of people would think that's a bit weird, but I actually don't think it is, because when you're trying to, from when a person passes to when you've got to do a funeral 3 or 4 days later, sometimes less, how do you cram all that into that 2 days? It's just going to be completely overwhelming. Would you agree, Kathryn?
Absolutely, Kaylee. What we hope to, our big message on Wednesday night would be to just empower families to know that they actually can take their time. With that time, initially when somebody dies, the grief is very overwhelming, and it is often a very big shock. Even if the death is impending, that finality sets your body, your mind into another space. So it's actually wonderful to have that time, and for the families that they can take their time. So with that unravels then a little bit of conversation. And even with a funeral I had just recently with a 37-year-old young man that was tragically killed in a car accident. The mother, we did the funeral in about 2 weeks, and that mum said to me during that second week, I'm so glad we've taken this time. There is no way I could have, buried my son 2 weeks ago, like last week. So it is really important.
Do you think a lot of people don't realise that you can do that? Do you think they're being pushed by funeral companies that we can get them in 3 or 4 days' time? Or do you think that maybe the families themselves want to get past it, therefore they want to get it done quickly?
I think it's a couple of factors going into that. And one thing is that I think that families might think, we just got to get it over and done with.
Yeah.
And then it'll be better. But in actual fact,
It's actually not.
It's not. It's not going to change that much. And in fact, that's where our passion has come from, is that if you do just take a little bit more time, if you do put a bit more thought into it, you're going to have less regrets down the track. Because if you do it really quickly and you haven't had the conversation, stuff's going to get missed. That's super important. And I know from my own family, you know, my mother has said, oh gosh, you know, I really wish that we'd mentioned this at, you know, our grandmother's funeral. And that's because it was all done very quickly. And so that key thing about the planning and the having the conversation, and it's wonderful that your mum is doing those little droplets, little gems. Keep picking up the gems, Kaylee.
How do you cope with sort of family members that have very strong views in one way and you have views in the other way? I mean, when we have this great friend, I have mentioned this funeral before, of Mike Agostini, but my girlfriend, it was really important for her that the stock that the order of service was written on was thick, beautiful, good quality paper. And that was very important to her, but to her family members it wasn't. So she actually said she stood up and had an argument in all this sort of mayhem that was happening around her. So how do you sort of recommend that people sort of get through family members and little issues like that?
Oh, Kate, if only I had that golden answer. But I think that it does come back to having the conversation, because if mum or dad or whoever it is has said, it's really important that we have this kind of, I would like my order of service to look like this. I want it to be on 200 GSM, you know? Then it's written down, right, they really want it on 200 GSM and it's got to be a nice gloss. Fab. Then there's no argument. It's there. It's in writing. It's been said.
It's it is a very stressful time in families. It's, I guess, a lot like a wedding where everyone wants to have their say. Everyone wants to, this is really important to me, and it's all of a sudden it seems really important to everybody, except for the person who's actually passed away or getting married, you know.
But if they want some say in it, then this is where we try and sort of open it up and actually solve a lot of this stuff. Because there, as you have already identified, there are so many decisions that have to be made suddenly in a short frame of time frame, and all of these decisions just become too much for people, and so they take an easy option or they just bypass it. And so to have pre-planning done, to just know a little bit more, to have some knowledge is so important.
And how far do you go? Like, I mean, I'm seriously not going to ask my father about the stock of the paper, but I do have clients. There you go, Dad. But I do have clients who ask me at wakes, and we do a lot of wakes at my catering company. Then they say we must have the passion fruit sponge because my grandmother loved passion fruit sponge. Or let's have rosé because my mum loved rosé. And how important is that to...
It's really important. I think those little details go such a long way, because what it does is, if those important little things are honoured really well, it allows the family then to have this sense of satisfaction and pride at the end, to go, do you know what, she would have loved that. Wouldn't she just have loved the way that beautiful sponge was the centrepiece in that table, and that's so her. And also to give that context, to say, look, the reason we're having this passion fruit sponge, it's her cake, and everyone knows that, and that's what they identify with her, and everyone just goes, oh, that's just... It's such a little thing. It's such a big thing too.
And you could even actually have the recipe of the cake in the order of service.
And use the recipe to make it. That's a great idea. I've always had this tell me if this is weird, because I think it's weird, that when I die, I want to come back to the funeral as a hologram. Scare the daylights out of everyone. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I love you all. I'm sorry I'm gone, but have a great party, because that's what I would have really wanted you to do.
But that is fantastic. That sort of thing, people do that. They do record.
I'd love
things.
that. We're like, yeah, please don't be sad, you know, but that would probably really upset everyone more, because I'd be on the screen moving.
But Kaylee, if they know you well, they'd expect that from you, you know? Like they go, oh, that's so typical Kaylee.
I could get like Vince Sorrenti to come and MC it and do some funny gags.
But that's it. I mean, that's what we come back to as well. It's about the authenticity. So if that is authentic to you, Kaylee, do it. You know, like that's what people want to recognise, that person that they loved right there in front of them. So that's what we're all about.
Can I ask one other question? And this goes back to that funeral that you and I did. the number of speeches and the length of speeches.
Yep.
Is that the same rule as at weddings? I do have to ask.
Okay, it's a good question, Kate. Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that there should be a limit. And we do, I know Kath is the same, we really try to sort of be able to limit the amount of time that people are given. So at a funeral, depending on how long we've got where we are, and we try to allow as long as is needed, but practically speaking, let's say 3 minutes. Realistically, 5, 7. But really,
45.
I think it comes to that discussion beforehand. It's, as celebrants, as funeral celebrants, we would say to that speaker before the ceremony starts, okay, you've got your 3 minutes and I'm going to tap you on the shoulder. If I feel like you might have gone a little bit over, just be aware. And all you have to do, the trick is, all you have to do is just be on the corner of their eye and just stand up and be in the corner of their eye and just creep toward them, and then they get the signal, and hopefully that keeps them on time. Yeah. Doesn't work every time.
I mean, ideally, as a celebrant, you want to have the tributes sent to you first so you can gauge exactly how long they're going to speak for.
Yeah. And little things are important. I used to work in the funeral industry, and little things when you work in it, to go up to the casket when it's at the front of if it's at the front of the church, and to bow to it, or to bow before you go back from it, really means a lot to the family. And my girlfriend lost her dad, and at the funeral I went up and I knew her dad quite well, and I kissed the casket. Aww. And and I just stood there for a second, and she was so, I mean, it's such a simple thing to do, but she was so moved by that that you don't have this, oh my gosh, it's a casket, I'm not going to touch it, ooh, scary dead people. You don't, you just get past that, you've got to almost man up and go, I'm going to go past that and I'm going to do this one thing.
That's right. Well, I will say too, sometimes the choice of the coffin can make it quite a tactile object, depending if you choose a particularly beautiful coffin beyond just a shiny wood one. If it's quite a tactile one, people are actually drawn to it. And I actually had one dad do a beautiful eulogy and then walk up and